Welcome to the Polygamer podcast, where gaming is for everyone. Join us as we expand the boundaries of the gaming community.
Hello and welcome to episode number 40 of the Polygamer podcast, airing on March 23rd, 2016. I'm your host, Ken Gagney, and I don't blame you if you've forgotten that. This show is supposed to be a bi-weekly podcast, airing the second and fourth Wednesday of every month, and we've missed our last two scheduled sessions, which means there has not been an episode of this show in over a month. I apologize. There are two reasons for the delay. One is that some of the people I wanted to speak with were attending the Game Developers Conference, the annual GDC held in San Francisco. Now that they are back from the show, I hope to catch up with them and get a post-mortem for the Polygamer podcast. The other and more relevant reason is due to a former guest of this show. Last June, for Father's Day, episode number 24 of Polygamer featured an interview with my father. This is, of course, a podcast about diversity, which makes it hard to justify having a guest who's an old, rich, white dude. However, there are other kinds of diversity, and the reason my dad was on the show was because he represents a different age demographic, an older generation of gamer who has already raised the next generation of gamers. Both parenting and the evolution of technology are valid topics for this show, and so that was a valid guest for this show. But the truth is that I was selfishly motivated to have that conversation with my dad. He'd been having a variety of health issues for many years, and I knew the likelihood was that he was getting worse, not better. I wanted to have that conversation with him on record so that there be something to remember him by. I regret to report that I was proven right and that he didn't get better, and on March 3rd he passed away at the age of 72. So you can understand how that might be disruptive to my podcasting schedule. My dad is the one who got me into video games and computers and science fiction. I don't know where I would be today, and not just in the biological sense, if it weren't for him. If you'd like to get to know the guy without whom this podcast would not exist, you can go back and listen to that episode of Polygamer, found at plyg.me/24. I've added a complete transcript of the episode, both to the blog post and to the ID3 tags for the MP3. And there's also a link to a 8-minute video interview I did with my dad that's available on YouTube and Vimeo, to which I've also added a transcript and subtitles. I don't want to go into the details of everything that has transpired in the last several years as we watched my father's health fluctuate, but I do have a favor to ask. This podcast does not have advertisements. It does not have sponsors. I do not have a Patreon. There is no way in which I make any money whatsoever on this podcast, and I've never asked for anything more than a review in iTunes. Today is the exception. The last 4 years with my father were a gift, and I would like to ask you to make a gift in his memory to the people who made those 4 years possible. If you go to polygamer.net/ed, that's ED, short for Edward, which was his name, you'll have the opportunity to make a donation to the organ transplant program at the hospital where he received much of his medical care. I'm a firm believer that small things do add up, and whatever amount you wish to donate in his name would be so much appreciated by me and by the rest of my family, including especially my mother. If you like, I'll give you a shout out on Twitter. Just drop me an email letting me know that you made a donation. And if you wish to remain completely anonymous, that is absolutely fine as well. However, the show must go on, and so I have a new episode of Polygamer for you today, recorded just 2 days after my father's funeral. I dove right back into my routines, not just because I was trying to bury myself in my work and ignore the pain, but because my routines are creative, they're productive. I like putting things out into the world. I think my dad liked that too. And this episode in particular was so much fun. It was with the co-host of The Dialogue Wheel, a podcast I appeared on last August. There's a link to that episode in the show notes. However, this co-host was not on that episode. They have so many hosts that if one person unfortunately can't show up one night, the show must go on. And so in this episode of Polygamer, we had a great time finally meeting, chatting for more than an hour, and that again was something I found very therapeutic. I've been trying to balance having the support and company of my friends while also having alone time to process things. This was one morning when I definitely needed somebody to talk to, and I think we ended up with a great podcast as a result. It's sad yet helpful how many people are able to relate to this whole new era in one's life, this bookmark that divides everything that happened before from everything that happened afterward. In fact, just 2 days after my father passed away, I was scheduled to be a guest on another podcast called Random Trek by Scott McNulty, we had to postpone that for a week because his mother passed away that same week. He too had had his mother on his show also last summer. And so when we finally did record that episode of Random Trek, that was yet something else we had in common. If you want to hear that episode where we analyze the second season Voyager episode Tuvix, you can find that at theincomparable.com/randomtrek. It's episode number 91 for March 17th. So thank you so much for listening and for your support. I'll try not to disappear on you again. Today I am speaking with my friend Chachi Bobinks. Hi, Chachi.
Hello.
Okay, so you have so many titles. Let me throw some out. You let me know which ones fit, which ones don't.
Okay.
Podcast co-host.
Yes.
Feminist.
Yes.
PAX Enforcer.
Yeah.
Event planner.
Yes.
Writer.
Yes.
Cat lady.
Absolutely.
Parent.
Yeah.
Wow. You wear so many hats.
Also, we should include Herald of the Inquisition, perhaps, and Commander, because I am those very often.
And where are you these things?
When I play a BioWare game.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Well, let's start right there,
Right.
actually. We first encountered each other tangentially last summer when I was on an episode of your podcast and you weren't.
Yeah.
That podcast being The Dialogue Wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So The Dialogue Wheel is, as I understand it, ostensibly a podcast about BioWare games. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So why BioWare? I mean, there are a lot of developers and publishers out there. Activision, EA, Capcom, Konami, Square. Very few of them have their very own fan podcast. What makes BioWare so special?
Well, we can blame me for this one. I have been a lifetime single game player. Growing up, we had like a Nintendo, like the old school Nintendo, not even the 64. Like the one that you had to blow in the cartridges and like ram them in there 15 times.
Yeah, of course. Just the 8-bit NES.
Exactly, the 8-bit NES. There you go. But we were very impoverished. So we had that, and then the two games that came with it, Duck Hunt and Mario Brothers.
Classic.
Classic, yes. And I basically played those games until that game system died. And then around the time when it died, which was when I was 10, so I played it, I don't know, for maybe 6 years or so, my dad bought a computer. And with that computer, we could also only afford one game. So he got me this troll game. You remember the Trolls, right?
What computer was it?
Oh God, I know. Something that it was a Microsoft one.
Oh, so some sort of a DOS box.
Yeah, it was some sort of a DOS box. It was archaic, maybe like Windows 1.2, something like that. Like it was before the years came into play.
Sure.
But yeah, we had this game where you played like you were a troll, like the little, fun troll things that everyone played with in the 90s. And then eventually that died. And then I stepped it up and I got a computer that had like Windows 98 second edition on it or something. And then there was a whole nother game we got with that one, and I don't even remember what it was. But basically my whole entire life has been spent only being able to afford one game and playing that one game. After that, like when I was in college, it was World of Warcraft, and I just played that with complete devotion for the longest time. And then someone introduced KOTOR to me, which is the first one was a BioWare title. The second one was anyway. But yeah, that's just kind of always been my thing. So I had picked up on Dragon Age Origins when I stopped playing World of Warcraft. And that was like the game that I played for the longest time. And then I started meeting people online and I picked up DA2. And then I picked up the Mass Effect series. So it was, like this whole line of only playing one game. And then all of a sudden I discovered BioWare. And that's kind of where I just invested myself. The people who do my podcast with me, I met because of the BioWare fandom. So that's something that we had in common. And we would chat every night, literally every single night we were talking. And 9 times out of 10 when we talked, it was about BioWare. Right around that same time, they had started doing all of the press kits and stuff for Dragon Age Inquisition. And so it just kind of naturally started there because that was my one interest in gaming. I'm a lot more diverse now. Game-wise, I've like picked up indie games and I play Steam stuff all the time, and I've got puzzle platformers filling up my Xbox One. But yeah, it's my fault. Totally my fault.
So you used to be a serial monogamist when it came to games.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And BioWare was who I devoted most of my time to until I finally picked up on other ones. I don't know.
And what is it that you like so much about BioWare?
Honestly, okay, this is so corny, but just bear with me. Their characters are the most relatable characters I have ever seen in a video game. They are so well written. They have personalities. They are fully developed on their own. You could grab any one of their characters and put it into a different game system and it would still be a BioWare character and probably the most developed character on that game at that point. I also love the romances. It's so cool. I love that when you interact with their characters, it can change their opinion of you, which is neat. There's like this level of interaction between you and BioWare characters you just don't find in other games nearly as often. There for the longest time, I would go to a game store and say, I like playing BioWare games. What do you have like this? And the guy would like scratch his face and say, how about this other BioWare game? Yeah, it's what they do is pretty rare and amazing. I think now other game systems do things that are pretty similar though. Yeah?
Yeah, I think a lot more games are moving toward a narrative focus. Games like Oxenfree, Life is Strange, Firewatch.
Yes.
But I think it's fair to say that BioWare is probably on the cutting edge in that respect.
Exactly. They do things that other people just haven't even thought about doing yet. And I think a lot of other game devs are focusing on bigger, better graphics, cooler tricks, neater fighting things. I'm not a fighter type person, so I have no clue what they want to do better there. But, other game devs are trying to make the biggest, best game, whereas BioWare seems to still be focusing on making the most wholehearted game. And I really like that. That's an area that I'm interested in more than other stuff,
That's interesting because I feel like there is some pushback from some traditional hardcore gamers about games should be about power and explosions as opposed to narrative and feelings. And yet I would definitely call Dragon Age a hardcore game.
Oh yeah. Oh my god, Dragon Age Inquisition is really hard to play. I play it like on the easy setting and dragons kick my butt regularly. But no, that's a fair assessment. But a lot of those same people who are rah-rah, hardcore games, statistics, blah, 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 a lot of those kind of speak badly about Dragon Age games because BioWare itself doesn't focus on that so much, which is interesting. Like, if you go onto, like, the BioWare forums and just kind of listen to what the fans say, there's a hard divide between those two. You've got, your hardcore gamers and then the people that the hardcore gamers call the filthy casuals, and what they're looking for is divided as well. It's a weird dynamic within the fandom.
Huh, so even people who agree that a game is amazing can't agree with each other why the game is amazing.
Exactly, yes.
That's really disappointing.
I know, it is. It's a really, really odd dynamic. I remember being part of a discussion once on the BioWare forums where there was a person who had some sort of a disability that made it harder for her to do some of the, fights and things like that. And she was saying that she wished that BioWare would have a narrative mode only. That way you could experience the story, because BioWare games are very much like a moving book, right? There's a lot of story in there. There's a lot of feels in there. There's a lot of things to interact with that are just narrative. And that thread, this conversation that we had where we talked about really wishing that there was a way that we could experience the story when something kept us from being able to do the gameplay part quite so well. And it got trolled heavily. Heavily trolled. People came barreling in to shout us down and say, this is a game, not a book. If you don't like that, go turn the pages of a book instead. And it was just a really odd experience because there were so many people who were legitimately angered over just the suggestion that there be a narrative mode of a game that could pull off a narrative mode perfectly. Because the fighting isn't always a part of the storyline.
I think I remember hearing about that thread, and I imagine that the counter-argument was that they should have a narrative-free mode as well.
Exactly. Yes, that is correct. That is correct. They were like, more fighting. Yeah, it was, yeah.
But I mean, I can see that totally working. One of my favorite games of 2015 was Life is Strange. Did you play that one?
I have not yet. It is in my Steam library, but I have not started playing it yet.
It's in the backlog.
Yeah, it's in the backlog.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that game, it's not challenging because it's almost impossible to lose. You basically are being shown a set of set pieces and with which you interact, but you really can't die. There are no wrong choices. There are better and worse, but no wrong ones. And if you want to play a game like that, I mean, that was one of my favorite games last year, and I think those kinds of games should exist.
Mm-hmm. I agree wholeheartedly. Everyone should be able to game, and if you're not good at fighting, or you can't do it, or you're unable to use a controller in a fashion that allows you to play games, why not have games that you can play? Gaming should be open to everybody, not just to those who have the ability to freeze a screen and use tactics,
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I do have a confession to make.
Okay.
You might hate me.
Okay, well, we're done then.
No, we'll keep recording. It'll just be more contentious.
Okay.
We're going to earn that explicit tag.
Yes.
All right. So I have not played a BioWare game in 13 years.
Oh my god.
I've missed out on a few.
Yeah. Was it KOTOR?
I played the original Knights of the Old Republic on the original Xbox.
Okay.
And it just was not my thing. And then when Mass Effect came out, everybody said, Ken, you should play this game. It's just like Knights of the Old Republic. And I'm like, that's a reason for me not to play it.
Okay. That's okay.
So I can't say I don't like Dragon Age because I've never played it.
Yeah, you might like it. It's really good. The Mass Effect series, here's my confession. Please, other people, don't block me over this, but I tried playing Mass Effect one time in early 2011, and I got about 2 minutes in and put the controller down and said, screw this, I'm not doing it. Because on the first Mass Effect title, you had to aim, like in a first-person shooter, right? And for people who play first-person shooters, not a big deal. They probably said it was easy. For someone who is used to using like macros and, hitting buttons on a keyboard to make things happen without having to aim, it was almost impossible to play. I waited about a year before I tried it again because a friend of mine was like, no, you're going to love the storyline. This has got things in there. I know you're going to love the things in here, but wouldn't tell me what it was. And so I tried playing it again, and I got far enough to find out that Raphael Sbarge was one of the voice actors, and I died and finished playing it immediately. So I was hesitant to play Mass Effect for about a year. I was a year's worth of hesitant to play it.
I take it you're a fan of that voice actor.
Oh God, yes. He is the one who did the voice of Carth Onasi in KOTOR. And I am very much in love with Carth Onasi. He is original Bay. He's my first game husband ever. And just hearing his voice, I was like, oh God, I'm so in. Because he is amazing. Amazing. And he does the voice of Caden Linko, which is one of the main characters in the Mass Effect series.
Well, the other thing that worries me about BioWare games is the investment it takes to see one through to the end.
Oh God, yes.
Right? I mean, I was able to play Oxenfree and Firewatch in like 4 to 6 hours max. And I've heard of people playing Dragon Age for hundreds of hours. Especially those of you who are raising families, how do you find that time?
Sometimes you have to take vacation from work. It takes a while. I am one of those kind of parents who put my kids to bed at like 8:30. And as soon as I know they're not going to come jumping back out to ask me for water or a stuffed animal or for the cat to stop meowing or whatever that night's aggression is, I will sit down and play until like 1 o'clock in the morning. When Dragon Age Inquisition came out, I legitimately took a week off of work so I could play it during the day. But also I had a podcast to put out about it. So I kind of had to. It was a dual purpose.
It was research.
Yeah, it was exactly. I was like, I'm doing my other job right now. Okay. It is also important. But yeah, I have heard of people who have, on Dragon Age Inquisition, have invested over 300 hours in one gameplay.
Wow.
I mean, not at one time, but in the same save, or whatever you want to say. That's crazy. That's a lot.
That is a commitment.
That is a huge commitment. It took me like 132 hours to finish out Dragon Age Inquisition, though. So I can't really throw too many shade eyes out there. I took a long time doing it, too.
So do you have a favorite BioWare game?
This is a contention point within the...
Who's your favorite child?
I love Mass Effect as a series. Nothing has made me feel as much as that game did. Something about Commander Shepard really sat with me. Like, she hit my heart, and it was the first time I ever played a game, and I felt like I had become the protagonist. And it's interesting because whenever I watch other people play it, and I hear Jen Hale's voice, Jennifer Hale, of course, she voices everything in the world. Like, if you went to the bathroom right now, I guarantee you she's narrating it somewhere. She's everywhere. But she does the femme voice for Commander Shepard, your protagonist in that game. And when I watch other people play it, I'm like, this is not right. What is going on? Why is my voice narrating your game? Because it's that ingrained into my head. But that does not make it my favorite game. My favorite game is Dragon Age 2, which is one of the least favored titles by BioWare ever, maybe. People hate it. But it's my favorite. It's my baby.
And what is it that draws you to that game when so few other people would call it their favorite?
Well, a lot of headcanon, mainly. The thing with Dragon Age 2 is that they were working on that when EA acquired BioWare. And EA's goal was to hurry up and get a game out because there was this new beautiful partnership going on. They had 6 months to develop that game. 6 months to make an entire game, beginning to end, like story, voice acting, graphics, everything. And so what we got was like the sliver of a game that could have been amazing. A lot of things are cut very short. A lot of dialogue is kind of clippy. We jump around a lot. There's like 3-year gaps between parts of this storyline, like literal 3-year gaps. You're playing and all of a sudden it's a year later. You're playing all of a sudden it's 3 years later. So there's a lot that's missing. It just kind of feels like this shell of a game. But because of that, if you're one of those people who are really in it for the storyline, you can see this, you can read the books, you can figure out what happened in these in-between points, and that's when it becomes beautiful. A lot of people don't like that you have to add to it to make it a great game. They're like, no, the game should just stand alone and be good, which is fair. But I'm going to headcanon anyway. So, a game that allows me to headcanon, I'm there. I'm so there. I feel like I just have more freedom to just make up whatever I want, and I'm cool with that.
So headcanon is things that you believe to be true, even if the game doesn't necessarily support it.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
Now, I can see what people mean about wanting to have a single cohesive experience. I think that was one of the complaints, especially one that I experienced with Destiny, which was you were playing this game, and then you discover this artifact, and it says, to learn more about this, visit our website.
Oh, are you serious?
Yes.
That's terrible.
There was all this backstory and narrative that was alluded to in the game, but which they did not include in the game. Instead, you had to go to, like, their online wiki.
Oh my god. How is that a thing? That's, ooh.
Yeah, I don't know why they made that decision, and it was not well received.
Yeah, I can understand why not. It would be fair to say the same of Dragon Age 2 to an extent. They didn't directly link you to other things, but the amount of codexes in the game, kind of wild, and you had to read them to really know what was going on. But they at least supplied it in the game. So
would you say, getting back to our original topic, the Dialogue Wheel is still a BioWare podcast?
I would say it's BioWare adjacent. For the longest time, it was nothing but BioWare. Nothing at all, especially when they were still doing the promotions for Dragon Age Inquisition. We had a lot more to work with then. Since then, Dragon Age Inquisition came out in November of 2014, I believe, if I'm remembering timelines correctly.
That is correct.
Yes. And it's been radio silent since then. They've had one title that was coming out that they dropped that was being worked on by the Austin offices. They've got a mystery IP that we know absolutely nothing about. And then they've got Mass Effect Andromeda, which has been delayed a little, but they also haven't started the media stuff on it yet, which is interesting because BioWare's pattern is normally a year before release, they start hitting stuff really hard. And here we are now a year before release and nothing's coming out at all. So I'm really hoping PAX East will have something for us. But anyway, we don't have anything to work on right now. So we're having to discuss other things. We introduced 2 more podcasts into our family. They're Dialogue Wheel podcast, but one's BioWare, one's not. If we had more to work off of, we would still be completely devoted to BioWare, but we can't continue to talk about the same things over and over again. We've done 50 episodes now, so we're at the point where we need something fresh and we're just not getting it. But instead, we try to talk about things that would be supported by the BioWarean line of thinking. So we're talking about other games, but discussing the diversity aspects. BioWare is very big on diversity. They're huge on having these games that really affect as many people as possible instead of being limited to your typical gamer, so to say. So we're grabbing their principles and applying them to other subject matters at this point. But at some point in every podcast, BioWare does come up. It's inevitable.
So is this all one podcast feed, or do people need to subscribe to 2 different feeds?
No, we have one podcast feed that has Date Night with the Dialogue Wheel, which is our main podcast, our BioWare podcast. We have Geek's Guide to Guardianship, which I just started up with Andrew, my co-host. And then we literally just started up the Pathfinder project, which is going to be devoted to Mass Effect Andromeda once we have more to go off of. They're all housed under the Dialogue Wheel website and Podbean.
Isn't Pathfinder a flavor of Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah, but it's also a word that's being thrown around by BioWare. But yeah, I'm thinking that would be a nice little mix there.
Well, that's not confusing at all.
No.
Have you had any BioWare celebrities on your show, like Jennifer Hale or David Gator?
We have. We had Liz Letnin, who is an awesome producer. We had Derek Holland on, who used to be part of the multiplayer team, but he's since left the company. We've had Alan Shoemaker, who was a QA guy back then, but now he's moved into, I think, level design. He's really cool. I love him so much. Who else have we had? Courtney Woods and Jordan Coe from BioWare Austin, who originally had been working on the Star Wars game that they do, their multiplayer game, but now they're working on the other titles. Who else have we had? Gosh, oh, and we've had Fernando Mello, who's like my favorite BioWare employee ever. He's like above all of the communication and website stuff and all that stuff. He's got a fancy title, but I forget it every time I mention him. So I'm a terrible person.
You are.
Yeah, I know, right? And I claim to be his number one fangirl, and I'm like, what's his title? Yeah, so we've had a few. I think that's everyone we've had. If I'm forgetting anybody, they'll forgive me, I'm sure. Maybe.
I saw David Gator at GamerX this past December. I'd love to have him on the show.
Oh God, me too. Me too, so much.
The closest I've come so far to BioWare is the cosplayer Emma Bell.
Oh, I love Emma Bell. Yes.
She does great work, and I met her at PAX East a couple of years ago, and finally got her on the show last summer. She just, her costumery is just amazing. When I saw her, there was a BioWare room at PAX East 2014, and she was hanging out outside there, and I'd never seen cosplay that detailed and intricate and professional. Mm-hmm. And I asked her, "Are you a BioWare employee? Or like, are they sponsoring you to promote their game?" Because I had never seen anybody just, in quotes, just a fan, devoting themselves so wholly to their art. And that was so amazing.
BioWare pulls in some amazing cosplayers. One of them, in fact, there was a Isabella, and Isabella is a character from a little bit in Dragon Age Origins, but also in Dragon Age 2. And in Dragon Age 3 multiplayer, but anyway, there was an amazing Isabella cosplayer who pulled it off as amazingly as possible. Like, you look at her and you're like, how does this exist? And now she actually works as one of their voice actresses. Her name's Allegra Clark. She's an amazing, amazing woman. I got to meet her at PAX Prime, and it was really hard to not scream the whole entire time. But, you've got her, you've got, a gentleman who used to go by the name Red Hot Cullen because his Commander Cullen cosplay was so amazingly spot on. We've got just these amazing people who are fans, but replicate these characters to a T. And I just don't understand how they do that, because I'm lucky if I can do like a stick figure that at least looks like a stick figure. Better yet, make a costume with armor and fur and like face and hair and stuff and look like a character from a game. Oh my God. I can't even imagine being that talented.
Right? I tried making my own costume once for a Halloween party a few years ago, and it was one of the most embarrassing nights of my life. Like, no photos of that night exist, and I made sure of that.
I have cosplayed once. Last year, this is so silly, but last year BioWare had an April Fool's joke where inside the BioWare game, inside the Dragon Age game specifically, they have a little creature called a Nug. And a Nug is kind of like a bunny with no fur, or like a pig with a mole's face. I don't know. I don't know how you want to describe it, but it's this hairless pink little creature, and people really love their Nugs. Nugs are precious to the fandom. And so BioWare jokingly announced that they were making a game called Nugalope, which was a Nug Otome game. So a Nug love simulator, basically. And I was so just amused by this gag that I took on one of the personas, because one of them just happened to kind of remind me of myself. So I had like her picture as my icon for the longest time. And then when I went to Prime 2015, I thought, why the heck not, right? So I cosplayed the Nug from the fake Nug Love Simulator game. And that's the only time I've ever cosplayed. Yeah. I had like the ears and the wig and like my outfit looked like the outfit she was wearing, and she carried a book, so I carried a book. And when people realized what I was doing, they were pretty amused. But I did not cosplay a nug to perfection. I couldn't get the small hairless thing down pat. I don't know.
And are there photos of this?
Nope. I destroyed those.
Well done.
Mm-hmm.
So you've obviously been introduced to a lot of amazing people, both guests and friends, through the BioWare community and through your podcast. What would you say has been the most insightful experience you've had as a podcaster? Or rather, what has podcasting taught you about yourself?
Oh, gosh. A lot. I suffer from social anxiety disorder, and it's pretty prevalent in my life. If I go to the store, I can't speak to other people in the store for the most part because I'm so scared of interaction with people I don't know. So becoming a podcaster meant that would happen more on a regular basis. The first time someone came on our show was the first time I ever talked to them. And I was putting myself out there on a platform that is really a part of my heart. I mean, I love my podcast. It's my baby. So I'm like bringing them into my house practically and talking to people I've never talked to before. And I had to step outside of that and not be scared. For example, and this is one of the reasons why I fangirl Fernando Mello so much, because he was part of a very eye-opening experience for me. But the first time we ever had anyone on the show who was not a cast member was when we interviewed him and Leah from the Dragon Age Keep about the Dragon Age Keep pre-release, which was an awesome opportunity for us because it wasn't even opened yet, and they were on our show talking about this work that they were doing. I was so scared I couldn't even type like the hello when they got onto the Skype call. I was mortified because I just never talked to anybody that I saw as important, and we had never had a guest on our show before. Tyler was part of the cast then, but Evan and Andrew were not. We had a lady named Kat who was with us at that time who she went her separate ways a long time ago. But Tyler was supposed to be there, and he was my security blanket, and he had something come up and couldn't show up. So I went into this show terrified and without my security blanket, so to say, and somehow managed to pull off an extremely great interview. It was amazing. It helped that those two were very, very accommodating and very kind and hilarious. So we got to keep the jokes going. But through that experience, I learned that like the humor part really works for me too. Whenever I get nervous, I'm going to crack a few jokes and all of a sudden I start to smooth out and we can get the show going. But mostly coming outside of my shell has been a really interesting experience for me. I had looked at our numbers a couple of months ago and was shocked to see how many people actually listen to our podcast. And I thought, here I am, this person who has trouble engaging in conversation with a shoe salesperson or a police officer if he pulls me over, or, a Girl Scout selling cookies. I can't engage with people outside of that, but somehow I can talk to all of these people and I'm not scared. And that's like amazing to me.
That is amazing. That's wonderful that you can do that.
Thank you. I was pretty nervous at the beginning of this call too, but I was like, no, we're going to talk about stuff I love. We're good. I can do this.
I wanted to ask you about that because right now you don't even have the home advantage. This is not your podcast. And we have never spoken before. I sent you a Twitter DM 2 weeks ago, and just in case you didn't remember me, I made it a point to say, hey, I was on your show.
I know, I talked to Andrew last night, and I was like, I'm not going to be on our home turf. What do I do? And he said, talk like you normally do. But yeah, it was a little nervous, but I'm good. I'm good now.
I do a lot of public speaking, and I find that I usually need to know one of two things, preferably both, but if I can get away with just one, either the topic I'm speaking about or my audience.
Yes.
And, wherever you go, whether it's your podcast or somebody else's, if you're talking about BioWare, then I think you got it down cold.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And especially, we're not talking about just BioWare, we're talking about you and things that you love, and who knows you better than you?
Yes!
So the reason I originally sent you a Twitter DM was because your name came up in some comments on a Medium.com article, which I'm not going to link to in the show notes, but you were offering some very insightful comments into the nature of feminism. Can we talk about that for a bit?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
So like I said, there were a lot of comments. The one that really caught my eye was when you said that there were 21 movements of feminism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, approximately 21 movements of feminism. That's correct.
I don't mean to waste your time by asking you questions that I could go Google, but
it's okay.
Where does the number 21 come from?
I had gone through before I wrote that response to that person. And I had gone through and looked because a lot of people think feminism is like a blanket and there's a lot of stuff on it, but we all feel the same way. And like you toss the blanket over the feminist and that's just how that works. But just like a football team has a ton of different positions and a hockey team has a lot of different positions and books have a lot of different genres, there are different ways to be a feminist. Like, for example, you have liberal feminist, anarchist feminist, you have, multiracial feminist, post-colonial, third world. I mean, there's just so many different ways to be a feminist. A lot of that ties back to who you are as a person. I personally, I'm a new age feminist is what I call myself. A lot of people call that mainstream feminism, but that term's kind of become sullied a bit by people who do not like feminism. So we go with new age. My brand of feminism, so to say, is about allowing a woman to be the true version of herself without societal pressure, without outside forces determining who you are. So the innermost you being that person outwardly too. There are some thoughtfuls, so to say, of feminism who do not quite think that way. For example, if I am, say, an adult entertainer, and that is who I want to be, that is what would fulfill the me in the most way possible. And I'm not doing it because I've been pressured by society to do it, or because I'm a struggling, poor single mom who's got to come up with money somewhere. If I'm doing that because that's who I want to be as a person, there are types of feminism who would say, no, don't do that because that's giving into patriarchal pressure. So there are all these different ways to be a feminist because there are different ways to be a human. And if we said everyone's got a feminist the same way, then that's putting another type of oppression on people. We might as well just be caving into the patriarchy, so to say.
So when you talk about being an adult entertainer, does that mean that you are a sex-positive feminist?
I am, yes. I am not only a sex-positive feminist, but I also believe that the sex-positiveness should be determined by yourself. So I allow for modesty in there too. So, well, not allow for modesty is probably a bad word to use, but there are some people who are, very open with their sexual lives and they enjoy, being revealing. There are some people who also find empowerment in being modest and not talking about those kind of things. I think there's a fine line between those two. And a lot of the people I know who are extremely sex positive, even more so than me, they tend to forget that sometimes the modesty can be somebody's way to go as well. And that doesn't mean they're not sex positive. It just means maybe they're not as open with it. Like, you can enjoy, for example, just the act of having sex with people. You can enjoy that, but maybe it isn't something you speak about. You're not being oppressed to keep those kind of things private. Maybe it empowers you to keep those things to yourself. But a lot of people tend to think like sex positivity is all about in your face, and I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
I came to feminism fairly late in my early to mid-30s, and coming from a Roman Catholic background, which I would say is not sex positive.
Yeah, no.
So if I am both sex positive and a feminist, should I patronize Hooters or not?
I have so many feels about Hooters. So many feels about them. There are women who work at Hooters who simply enjoy working at Hooters, and that's what they want to do. There's something about their job there that they enjoy. Maybe they enjoy being themselves and getting to be, sexually open in their careers. And that's cool. I don't understand that thought pool myself because it isn't one that I subscribe to. I'm a very modest person coming from a strong Mormon background, but I draw the line when a young girl says, I need to go get a job there because I need to make more money. Because then there is an outside pressure on her. Like, oh, you're young, you're pretty, you've got big boobs, whatever it is that people are saying, you should go work and make money off of them. She might not be 100% there because that is the innermost her saying, I want to work at this place. She might be there because of these outside influences. So my problem with Hooters is, I don't know. Are you there because you want to be there? If so, cool. Go on with your bad self. Are you there because you're being pushed there because you literally have no other options? There isn't any other place you can go. And so maybe you feel trapped there, then please don't, you know? I myself don't go to Hooters ever, mainly because it isn't an environment I'd bring my kids into. My kids are very young, and that determines a lot of where we're going to go eat at. But I just have a lot of mixed feelings about it. I also watched the Undercover Boss that they had at Hooters and was disgusted, by the way. Can we talk about that for a second?
Please do. I haven't seen this show.
Okay. Undercover Boss is an amazing show that I watch every single week. And what they do is they put like the CEO of a company and hide him inside of the company so that he can experience the day-to-day operation. And they like disguise them and all that stuff so you can't tell and pretend like they're on a reality show, a different reality show where they're trying to become like a business owner or whatever. So people won't suspect stuff. When they did their show on Hooters, they showed that these male bosses were literally exploiting the women servers. Like, for example, there was one guy who needed to send some girls home that day because they were overstaffed. And to figure out who was going to be the one who went home, he set out plates of beans on a table. And they were required, with their hands behind their back, to bend over and eat the beans directly off the plates. Like, butt up in the air, wearing their outfits. And he was just watching like a sicko the whole entire time. Which is clear exploitation. The CEO fired this dude. He was like, out. But I have concerns about that kind of stuff too, you know? Because you do hear a lot of stuff about women being exploited there. Because it is a sexually charged environment. I know they have like some protection for their people. Like they're not allowed to be asked out on a date by a patron or whatever. But I don't know. Sexually charged environments aren't always the safest for women, especially ones who might be there because they have to, because they have bills to pay. It unsettles me as a whole. I have a lot of feelings on that. Can you tell?
I can tell. You have all the feels.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about whether or not someone is there because they want to be or because they are experiencing outside influences, but I'm not sure you can ever say somebody is not having outside influences because no decision is made in a vacuum.
Exactly.
And there's always going to be an outside influence.
Exactly.
So how can you tell if somebody is someone who truly wants to be there, whether there is Hooters or somewhere else?
I can't tell. I can't tell what's in another person's heart, but I can encourage other women to stick to what they want to do themselves, which is a lot of what New Age feminism is about. Again, it's about the promotion of the most innermost you. We can parallel this to homemakers, right? There are women who are homemakers who stay at home with children and raise them because that is truly who they are. There is something about that lifestyle, that passion. You know, it's passion for them. There are some who are because that's the way that their relationship is set up or because they live in a society where they're told that they can't leave the home. And those people aren't there for passion. They're there for, because they have to, you know, it isn't a choice that they're making. Those are the ones that are sitting there going, I wish I could get back into the workforce. Or I wish I could enter the workforce. I can't look at a woman and tell, is she there for herself or is she there because society has made her or her husband has made her or her family has made her or her religion has made her? I can't. But what I can do is educate them on the freedom of choice. That way, maybe one day, maybe not the day that we're talking, but maybe one day they can look back and say, you know what? I need to do what I need to do. I need to get myself out of this situation I've been pressed into. And then they can make that choice on their own. And
if somebody does decide that they are a feminist, one of those 21 movements, is there a flow chart they go through to figure out which one they belong to?
Yes. No, there's a feminist simulator that you have to go through.
Yay.
No. Well, no. I mean, you can look it up. It's something you can Google, clearly. But I think that the first step to take is to figure out, why do you feel like you need to speak out for women? What is your angle? What's important to you? And then looking and finding a group that moves along with you. That's kind of the most important part. And that's kind of a daunting practice. But at no point in your feminism will someone come up to you and say, okay, we need to go ahead and register you under the Marxist Party or whatever that one particular thing is. You can move kind of freely about, throughout all this. It's just, they're like schools of thought, and maybe you'll be part of them, or maybe you'll partially agree with them, but at least it gives you a direction to go in when you're researching things and trying to figure out how things work, or even looking for feminist icons. A lot of the feminist icons are very much assigned, so to say, to a certain type of feminism. But you're not required to choose. It's all about being the most innermost you. So if there's an issue that you're passionate about, Either just be passionate about it or find out who else is passionate about it. And then you know who to talk to. You can be part of a community or whatever.
Back on Christmas Eve of 2014, I aired an episode of this podcast where I spoke with 4 people who play video games but don't consider themselves to be quote-unquote gamers.
Uh-huh.
And I talked to them about things that they had not heard of before, like GamerGate and Anita Sarkeesian.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, one of the questions I asked them was, what is a feminist? And one of the people I asked said a feminist is somebody who thinks that women are better than men.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Are you having feels?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, there are some feels in there.
Well, is that one of the 21 movements?
Absolutely not.
No?
No. Not that I'm aware of, at least. I think maybe the closest to that, I don't know. Because we all kind of still view ourselves as equally or below.
Because didn't you mention that there's a separatist movement?
Yes. Well, the separatist movement it's kind of like a radical movement. But it's not radical feminism, by the way. It's not radfems. But the separatist movement is a group that believes that the divide between women and men is so great that we cannot repair it. So we're just not going to have anything to do with men. Which is fine. I can understand why a lot of women who have been very hurt, by men or by the patriarchy or what have you would go that way. And that's okay. I'm not going to tell anyone you're required to interact with men. But separatists are like, no, we're not going to date men. We're not going to be with men. We're not going to sleep with men. We're not going to talk to men. We're just we're over here. Like, that's it. You're gone. I don't believe that they see themselves as higher than men. I think they're just done with men.
That doesn't seem like a long-term strategy for the survival of the species.
No, not at all. It's not a movement that I support at all. But again, I'm not going to tell a woman how to feminist. So if she wants to think that way, that's okay. But it isn't something I subscribe to, because I have a good relationship with men. I date men. That men aren't terrible to me. Just a lot of them need a whole bunch of work, in my opinion. And I don't think it's going to do anything to repair the damage. Because it is a very extreme form of feminism.
Right. I don't think the separate but equal strategy has worked well in this country.
Nope. It's led to a lot of problems. It's led to a lot of wars. It's something that hasn't worked worldwide, ever, maybe. So it isn't something I can really get behind myself. So, I mean, they even go so far to say that men feminists should not exist. That's something that they believe. They're like, no, you're still part of the patriarchy. I don't want you in my movement. And I definitely don't agree with that, because I think a man who allies with us, who truly allies with us, is incredible. That's amazing.
Yeah, the one question I wish I'd asked my podcast guest was, can men be feminists? If feminists are somebody who believes women are superior, why would a guy be a feminist?
Exactly.
Because there are men who say they're feminists. He must know that. And I wonder what he thinks they mean by that.
Yeah, knowing that people think that feminists see themselves as superior and that's why we're upset or whatever, that bothers me, because then they're going to discount the movement immediately. And then the fact that they would discount the movement for that also bothers me, because that's them saying, nope, you're wrong. You're not better than me. We're better than you. That's playing to that dynamic that caused feminism to be a thing in the first place. Ugh.
I once had somebody comment on one of my YouTube videos that the fact that feminists exists is proof that there is no patriarchy, because if there was a patriarchy, we wouldn't allow feminists to exist.
Yeah, are they not aware of feminist history and stuff? Okay. Because we've kind of been fighting back for a very long time just to have our own movement.
Right. So another very divisive stance that people sometimes feel the need to take is in GamerGate, which is not a topic I often bring up on this podcast, because that way lies madness. But it was the context in which I was reading your comments on Medium.com, and you said that you don't have a pony in the GamerGate/anti-GamerGate race.
Correct.
And some people feel that there are not sides to begin with. There's a GamerGate, and there's the people that they harass, and those people didn't choose to be harassed.
Yeah.
And yet there are other people who feel you do need to take a stance, that this is a movement that we need to stand up to and not let them bully us. So can you talk a little bit about the divisive nature of this and why, for you, it may not be as divisive as it is for some?
Yeah. There was a time, and I think it was like the summer after GamerGate, so maybe the summer of last year, when myself and my podcast mates had a little powwow. And Tyler felt 100% that we needed to make it clear that we were not with this group of people. And it wasn't like we were being accused of being pro GamerGate or anything. He was just like, you know what? We have a platform. We need to speak out against this. And I was 100% there. And we did. We had an entire podcast where we spoke out against GamerGate. And we didn't get any kind of bad response from that. And then a couple of weeks later, there was a GamerGate person who confronted us. But in like a nice, kind, let's be friends kind of way. And invited us to come on to his podcast. Oh, let me correct that. He invited me to come onto the podcast. But I started to get like the feelings like things just weren't right. Cause why would this group of guys want to talk to little old me? And I made Andrew go with me. Cause again, he's probably my best security blanket cause I love him very much. And it ended up being a trap, basically. The conversation was great. And then about halfway through the conversation, I discovered that it was a live show and there was a comment section and a chat going on along with it. And I found the comment section and the little chat and I was horrified. Because while we're chatting happy, friendly, things were just a little awkward, but not bad. And sometimes I had to like beat them down because they were saying things that were just utterly terrible. There was this entire conversation going on in the background, that was 100% against me. Like calling me things that even people I've met in real life have never called me and saying deplorable, disgusting statements about me. And it kind of scared me a bit because I am a parent, right? And I know what they do to people that they don't like. And at that point I withdrew. I was like, no, I don't want anything. I don't want to be on the plus side. I don't want to be on the negative side. I'd really rather not be a known player in this race at all. So when I say I don't have a pony in the race, it's more like because I'm a retired racehorse. And it scared me. I mean, you don't know what to expect from these people. You look at what they've done to, people like Brianna Wu and Zoe Quinn and Randy Lee Harper. And you know how easy it is for them to do those things because we're in this information age where you can Google yourself and find your own address in a matter of minutes. And I did not want to become a victim. Especially since I'm a single mom with kids. You know, what would I do? Oh my God. I can't imagine the day when I come home and find that someone has spray painted something on my garage or worse. So yeah, I withdrew from that fight. But when it comes to, you know, there being a divide between GG and AGG, I do think it exists, mainly because there is a good portion of people who participate on Twitter and go on forums and are active in the internet communities for gaming who are not touched by either end. Yes, GamerGate does attack everyone that they can. I mean, if you come into their mentions, you will get dogpiled. That's just how that happens. You can't say something to a GamerGater that they don't agree with without them broadcasting it. But you can exist and not touch this kind of stuff. But it's putting on blinders if you do so. I think it takes a little bit of work to ignore it, or you're just pretty new to the internet. I don't know.
So you are a retired racehorse in the GG race, and I appreciate the insight into standing up to and against GamerGate. I have friends in the journalism industry who have not publicly taken a stance against GamerGate, and they continue to produce remarkable writing, and when they are a marginalized voice, I sometimes think that's the best thing you can do is just to be out there. And I sometimes think that them standing up to GamerGate would jeopardize their well-being and their career.
Exactly.
And so some people might look down on them for, you know, being neutral or being silent, but I think there's value to just keeping on as well.
Exactly. Well, it's one thing to fight for a cause, right? It's one thing to be that public voice that's shouting down the angry masses, and that's honorable. It really is. Saying I am going to be the one who's fighting this battle is an amazing thing, and I have so much respect for all the people who are AGG, anti-GamerGate, and speak out against GamerGate. That's amazing. But there's also a huge price that you pay there. And I think people should feel comfortable in declining that battle if possible. Because they generally don't come into your mentions for the most part. They don't come into your mentions if you are not saying things that could get their attention. Now I know that might not be completely fair because there are people who they have jumped at just because they existed. And so those people, that's a different story. But a user of Twitter could use Twitter for a very long time and never once get their attention. A journalist could not get their attention. And I don't mean get their attention as in trying to get it, but just somehow get their attention. And if you can, I definitely recommend you just keep going that way. Unless you've got maybe a good shield of anonymity and there's no way for them to figure out who you are, which a lot of us just aren't promised.
Right. I have spoken about the topic on this podcast, and I tweet links to the show, but I've never used their hashtag.
Yes. There you go. When you use their hashtag, it's kind of like the bat signal, but like for evil, not for good.
Right. I mean, somebody once tweeted a link to my interview with Zoe Quinn, and they used the hashtag and my Twitter handle. Oh. And well, it was well intended. It was coming from the Cyberbullying Research Center. Mm-hmm. And when I saw that tweet, I'm like, my life as I've known it is over.
Yeah, right.
But nothing happened.
Exactly.
And I think it's for two reasons. I think one is taking the time to listen to a podcast requires a lot of effort. Uh-huh. Which, researching your facts is not one of their strong suits. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I'm a straight white cisgendered male.
Yeah. Exactly.
Not exactly the target demographic.
Exactly. We had Brianna Wu on our show once, right?
Really?
Like in the thicket of GamerGate. Not only did we have Brianna Wu on our show, but she was there to talk about harassment.
Wow.
Like, that was my goal in bringing her in. I had just gone through a shitstorm that was not related to GamerGate in any way. Wherein myself and a Dragon Age voice actor had the most epic battle of all times on Twitter, and it was horrendous. And it led to a lot of harassment, because people took his side instead of mine. And there were some other people who were also hurt in the melee or whatever. And I was very concerned about those people because I've got, like a force wall up and I'm pretty good. Like, it's hard to get to me, emotionally or whatever. But there were some people who had maybe 20 followers on Twitter and didn't really do the internet so much who got harassed and dogpiled because of this. And so I brought her on the show and I was like, let's talk about harassment, how you deal with it, how you avoid it, things that we can do to build a better community, stuff that I thought GamerGate would be all over. Not one word was said by them. None whatsoever. Tyler was like crying almost. He was so concerned that this was going to get me dogpiled by them. Nothing happened of it at all.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Because, a lot of people do look at me as the leader of the dialogue wheel, which, I do the most work, so maybe that's fair, but, so it was coming from a woman, and it was a woman talking to their number one target at that point. I don't know why. It may have just been because it was an hour-long podcast, and that takes a lot of work. I don't know. But to this day, nothing has been said by them about this podcast at all. I don't know.
I sometimes worry if the lack of harassment for me hosting this podcast means nobody's listening to it.
Maybe.
Oh, thanks. I feel better.
I don't know. It was one of our highest listened to podcasts too. Like, statistically speaking, it got a ton more listens than most of our podcasts do. And so then, like, when I was watching the numbers climb, I was freaking out, and then nothing ever happened. I don't know.
Yeah, like my interview with Zoe Quinn is one of my most popular episodes.
Uh-huh. There you go.
And yet, there was almost no result as far as I'm concerned. I
kind of wondered if, as podcast hosts, we kind of have a very outward presence on the internet. We're not like the person who's lurking in the backgrounds. So we may seem to be a little bit more confrontational because we do put ourselves out there. We put our opinions out there. Maybe we're seen as too strong of a force to attack. I don't know. Like, they're like, why would I go after her? She's got a podcast and she's sharp, Yeah, why would I go after him?
But who has a louder voice than Brianna Wu?
God, right? That's true.
I mean, she has multiple podcasts. She's written for multiple magazines and websites. She has her own video game company. I mean, if she wants to be heard, she has opportunities. And I don't think that her harassers see her as too strong. Maybe that's because of her demographic. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's so unpredictable.
It really is.
Yeah. I've purposely structured this podcast episode so that we would start and end on lighter topics and have the dark stuff in the middle.
Okay, perfect.
I'm ready to move on.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So you recently did a whole episode that I loved of your podcast all about being a PAX Enforcer.
Yes.
And enforcers are the volunteers who help manage the lines, coordinate the event. Pretty much anyone you see at PAX wearing a red shirt and usually a utilikilt is an enforcer. Do you have a utilikilt?
No, I don't.
You gotta get on that.
I wear yoga pants. I don't know.
Well, that sounds comfortable.
It's very...
If you're gonna be working, you might as well be comfortable.
Exactly.
How long have you been a PAX Enforcer?
A year and a half now. I started with the first PAX South, which was in 2015. So about a year and a half.
And have you enforced multiple venues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done both PAX South, and then I did PAX Prime last year, and I'm about to go do PAX East.
Will this be your first time at PAX East?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's going to be my first time in, like, the top part of the country ever. I've never gone higher up than Kentucky. So...
Wow.
Yeah.
What? Wow,
I've
really?
never seen the ocean. I'm so excited. I'm going to fly over the ocean at some point and be like, oh my god, this is bigger than a bathtub.
Are you going to have extra days on either end to go explore Boston?
A little bit, yeah. I'm going to have 2 days after the show. I'm flying in like 1 o'clock in the morning that Thursday before, but I work Expo Hall, so I have to be there in the building the whole entire day. But I'll have Monday and Tuesday to kind of roam a little bit.
Because you know this is where Fallout takes place.
Yes, that's what I've heard.
So you got to do the Fallout tour.
Yeah,
Okay.
Totally. I think I'm going to do that.
So what motivated you to sign up to be a PAX Enforcer?
Well, it's kind of silly. I used to be on Tumblr. I don't use Tumblr anymore. But I was just kind of searching around on Tumblr and came across the Feminist Enforcers Tumblr account. and it's this meme. It is a legitimate meme where they take pictures of enforcers and put feminist messages on there. And it amused me a lot because I love memes. I am such a memeaholic. I have like 1,000 memes on my computer. It's really sad. And so I was looking at this and I vaguely knew what PAX was just because of BioWare. BioWare pretty much always has a very strong presence at PAX. And so I knew what PAX was because I would, stay up at 2 o'clock in the morning to watch a panel that they were doing at PAX Australia. Or, I would have friends who were at East who were, rapidly texting me all the updates so that I could get them up on my website and stuff like that. So I knew what it was. I just didn't know what an enforcer was. So I went and looked on the website to find out what this whole enforcer business was. And I thought it was cool. They talked about how you would help run the show. And I'm an event planner, so I do that kind of stuff anyway. But I could be doing it at a gaming show? What? Instead of a trade show, which is what I typically do. I like the idea of trading in my hammers that I typically have to talk about at a trade show to talking about video games instead. And at that exact time, they were looking for people to establish the enforcer community in San Antonio for PAX South. So I just kind of threw my hat in just to see what would happen. And they took me and put me in the Expo Hall, and I loved it ever since.
But tying this back into what we were talking about earlier, I imagine that social anxiety disorder could really manifest itself in such an active and large community.
Absolutely. And on top of that, tying it into another earlier topic, I did not realize that your handle that you used was what you went by in the show. So when you're up there, you're not, Alice Jones. You are Chibi Kawaii, Kucha, whatever. And so when I went into the show, I had no clue that I was then going to be Chachi Bobinks, the person, not Chachi Bobinks, the pseudonym. So that actually added a lot of anxiety to it because at that time I was kind of ruffling the feathers of GamerGate a little bit more than I normally would. And I had just come off of this huge battle with the person I was talking about earlier, that voice actor I made mad. And there were a lot of people who did not like Chachi Bobinks. And I was going to go into a show with 50,000 people in attendance and be Chachi Bobinks, not me. So I was very, very scared going into it. Like the day before is when I found all this stuff out and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing to myself? And the first show that I worked, I didn't really communicate with people that much. There was one guy, who I got stuck with because I was shadowing him, learning how to be an enforcer. And we talked a lot. We became friends there for a while. And he was the only person I communicated with the whole entire show, aside from just like what I had to say. So I'm going on break. I'll be right back. Yes, my feet hurt. Please give me Neosporin. Like, that was it. But by the time I went to my second show at PAX Prime, I really figured out that I was a part of this family, not a part from it. And it helped. One thing about having social anxiety is that whenever you're in an area that you see as safe, you could really become yourself. And common interests really help a lot. So I was in a gaming convention with people who also love gaming, and the Enforcer community, at least in the expo hall setting, they are very feminist, and they're very progressive, and it's a very left-wing kind of audience. So I found myself surrounded by people who were very much like me. And that helped a lot. So first show, terrified. Second show, great. Third show, I'm like part of the family. We're drinking together. It's amazing.
That's awesome, especially that you would describe the Enforcer community as left-wing, because I think we can all agree that there are elements of PAX and its management that are problematic.
Exactly. And that's why I have to say the Expo Hall community, because I don't know the people outside of Expo. And Expo is very set aside from the rest of the group because we do work the entire show. So open to close in the Expo Hall, we're there. So we don't get the chance to kind of communicate with people outside of the Expo Hall as often. So like people who work line management, they get to actually see the show. And they get to communicate with other enforcers. So, you know, I don't know. I don't know how they are, but I do know that a lot of your Expo people, they're there for the Expo, not necessarily because they agree with disgusting jokes made by Penny Arcade comic strip. But a lot of people don't know that, you know, PAX and Penny Arcade, there's a little crossover, like person-wise, like people who work for Penny Arcade also work at the Expo. But there's kind of a big divide when it comes to ways of thinking. I think a lot of that is because of Kristen Lindsay, who we affectionately call PRD. She's our enforcer mama. Enforcers are kind of like her. So we're like mom. And mom is like the most incredible person I've ever met. She's a very open, diverse, vibrant person, and her babies, her enforcer babies, really seem to reflect that a lot. I don't think that's because she's cold us that way, but I think that's just the environment that she's made. There are a lot of people who enforce who are not fans of Penny Arcade, which is interesting to me because I'm one of them.
I can imagine that it's important to compartmentalize, because if you're going to boycott PAX due to not liking Penny Arcade, then you should also boycott Child's Play.
Exactly. And Child's Play is amazing and has nothing to do with the think tank of Penny Arcade as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely divided too.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I've never been interested in being an enforcer is because your obligations to the event prevent you from seeing a lot of the event. Do you ever feel like you're missing out?
Oh, I know I am. At PAX Prime, they had, and I didn't know going into it what it was, but every single person I met, BioWare fan and BioWare employee alike, all looked me straight in the eye at one point and said, you need to be at this panel that we're doing at Saturday at like 5 o'clock, right? Or whatever time it was. I mean, I had met freaking Mike Laidlaw, who is like the big head, he's huge at BioWare. And he even did that. He was like, you're going to be at that panel, right? And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I need to be there. I could not make it because I was enforcing. And they ended up dropping that they were doing not only a DLC, but the last DLC. And had this huge show, and it was amazing, and thankfully archived later to YouTube. But stuff like that really, really made me sad because I wanted to be there too. I want to be there with my people, celebrating awesome things and announcements and stuff. But the truth is, if it happens between 8 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night, I can't go because I'm in the expo hall. A lot of the other enforcers, like other departments, like line entertainment and line management and stuff like that, they work shorter shifts and they get to choose kind of where they're placed throughout the day. So they do get to go do stuff, but expo hall is not like that. We are there for the expo hall. So yeah, I feel like I miss out on a lot, and I know that I am. I have never gotten to demo a game at PAX. None at all, which is like half the purpose of being in the expo hall in the first place, and I've demoed absolutely nothing. But I also get to be a part of the show that no one else gets to be. You know, oh my God, you know, it's cool. You get to work on a one-on-one basis with people who create things that you love a lot. When I was at PAX South, one of my booths was Chessex, right? The people who make the most glorious dice in the history of mankind.
I love ChessX.
Ah, yes, me too. They were one of my booths. So I get to go and work with them and talk to them and chat with them. And they gave me like a thing of dice as a thank you gift whenever I was leaving. And you know, that was super cool. Table Titans was one of my booths. Are you familiar with Table Titans?
I am not familiar with Table Titans.
Okay, they're a webcomic. I think like a webcomic group. But one of the guys who draws for them, or I guess the leader of this group, so to say, was actually at the booth. And apparently he's super famous and I had no clue. So I'm like bringing him coffee from Starbucks and people are freaking out because he's so famous. And to me, he's just another guy that I'm working with and he treats me the same way. And that's cool too. So we get a different experience. It's not the experience the attendees get, but we get an experience that is different and maybe cooler in a way, you know?
Have there been any particular individuals that you got to meet as a PAX Enforcer that you might not have encountered as just an attendee?
Yeah, but I forgot most of their names. Sometimes I get to escort YouTube stars and Twitch stars.
Well, like PewDiePie?
Yeah, not PewDiePie. Shoot. I hear the name PewDiePie and I'm taking a bathroom break. I am not going to be part of that particular kind of craziness. And I narrowly avoided having to be one of the escorts for Markiplier at Prime. I was like, oh, my feet hurt. I need to stay out. Please don't make me do that. But you know, other Twitch stars or what have you. And so sometimes they may need to go from one end of the hall to the other. They normally live in the Twitch booth because a Twitch booth is like massive and has like an enclosed area that you can't even see. So they normally hide in there, but sometimes they'll go and visit other booths and do like a signing at somebody else's booth, like to help promote their game or whatever. And so there has to be like an enforcer who gets them from point A to point B and then also watches over that crowd. Because they're going to draw a crazy crowd to potentially a tiny booth. So I've gotten to do that a few times. And I had no clue who these people were. Because I don't watch Twitch streams. Unless it's one of my friends who are playing something and I want to see what they're doing. So it means nothing to me. But, you know, there were little teenage girls screaming and crying. And I'm standing next to this guy and I'm like, who are you? What's your name? All right. You know? But yeah, I haven't really, aside from those kind of people, I haven't really met anyone who's famous because I was an enforcer. Because I was there, I've gotten to meet cool people, but not because I was an enforcer.
I can appreciate not quite getting the appeal. I once went to a sci-fi fantasy convention and there was a young girl out in the hallway, like a teenager, or if even, and she looked like she was having a nervous breakdown. Uh-huh. And even though I was not an enforcer or anything of the sort, I stopped and I'm like, are you okay? Do you want me to call somebody? What's wrong? And like she was hyperventilating and she could barely get out the words, I just met Tom Felton.
Oh my gosh.
Like, oh, you met Malfoy. Okay. Draco Malfoy. Gotcha. That explains everything.
I would fangirl for a minute over that one. Yeah.
But so I was actually on my way to his Q&A session and I got to ask the question, I just met a girl who was having a nervous breakdown. Can you explain to me your appeal? And he was sort of speechless at that question, and his manager just kind of looked at me and said, if you don't get it, then you don't get it.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, okay, moving on.
Either you're in or you're out, okay.
Right. So, wow, I guess I do have to take a side in that one. Mm-hmm. More divisive than Gamergate, Draco Malfoy.
Let's just be clear, I'm very pro Draco.
Okay, you do have a pony in that race.
My pony is a big one too, yes. Super strong.
Love it. Well, I am very much looking forward to PAX East, but if you're working 13 hours a day, you might not be able to come to my panel Friday at 7 p.m.
I actually might be able to sneak in late, perhaps.
That'd be amazing. Mm-hmm. The panel is on games journalism, but not ethics in.
Phew, I thought
I'm like, okay, speaking of horses, we have beat that one to death.
Yeah, we have.
Which is too bad because, I mean, actually, ethics in games journalism is a legitimate topic, and it's a conversation that needs to be had.
I know. You know, I've said to quite a few people who were GG, if you actually stood for the things that you said you stood for, I would probably be on your side. Right. I would probably be a GamerGater. if you actually stood for the things that you said that you did. Because
Right.
I do think there's a lot of dirty journalism. I do think that we need to be, if, say, you're reviewing somebody's game, it needs to be someone you don't have a personal relationship with. I agree with that. Absolutely. I mean, obviously everyone should be able to review a game if you want to, but I can see problems that arise from the best friend of a game developer being the one who reviews the game, because maybe they're not going to be as clear with things as they should be. I got that. I'm totally there. But that isn't what they're about. That's like their really weak cover. That's like the sheepskin that they pull over themselves so they can be like, no, we have legitimacy, but we also harass women and send them pictures of dead bodies. And come on,
Right. No, there was a GamerGator just 2 weeks ago who tweeted this expose of me where he linked that not only was I writing nasty things about GamerGate on my podcast blog, but I was also backing Zoe Quinn on Patreon. And I'm like, okay, the blog actually says, full disclosure, I back Zoe Quinn on Patreon.
Yeah.
And also, I am an individual. I don't have an editor, nor do I have a staff reporting to me. If either of those things were true, we would have to come up with a consistent ethical policy to which we would all adhere. But if it's just me, then yes, I'm going to be interviewing my friends.
Yeah, that's how you make a podcast for the most part. We don't exactly have the most amazing pull when it comes to getting people who are not our friends on.
Exactly. You gotta, you have to work within your network.
I had a similar thing happen recently with Kiva Bay. Kiva Bay is a precious cinnamon roll. I love her so much. She's a good friend of mine.
She does the feminist deck, right?
Yes, she does feminist deck. She chose me to be one of her cards, so I will be in the feminist deck. And then I also signed on to be part of the Kickstarter, so I am a backer as well, at the highest level I could afford. And then she came to me and asked me to help her do art. So I did the logo and part of the card design for the deck itself. So if you looked at that really cool little feminist deck icon with the crescent and the sword and everything, that's me. That's my artwork. And she had me do that because I do typography, and logo design. And she knew who I was, So that is something that she did not pay me for. I just did it. There may be compensation at some point in the future. I don't know, but to date, I have not been paid for this kind of stuff. She had also said that she was going to be, sending some sort of compensation to the people who modeled, so the people who will be on the cards. That also has not happened to date, and if it does, I will not accept the money. It's not something that I was going to be part of so I could make money off of it. I don't plan on Kiva Bay ever sending me money for anything that I do. Because I'm doing it because I support what she's doing. I think the feminist deck is awesome. But there was a GamerGator who was throwing a fit because she had missed a deadline. She had been communicating with us all the way up into that deadline on a monthly basis. Every month she sent something out and said, this is what's going on. She was 2 days late on when she typically sent out an update, and it was in the month that we thought the deck was going to be completed. So, oh my God, she's taking everyone's money and she's doing nothing with it. So I went back and I replied, and I'm like, dude, I get the backer emails because I'm a backer. She actually did send us out an update yesterday because he's like throwing this fit afterwards, about her not having an update when he expected to see one, but we had gotten it the day before he was throwing us fit on Twitter. I'm like, dude, no, we've got an update. She's communicated with us clearly. We knew what was going on. During all this time, she had a problem with her computer. She got a new computer. She's been openly communicating with us. This is not a thing where she's dropped a ball. I have backed things on Kickstarter that were legitimately dropped. There are ones where I paid in July and I still haven't heard anything. But Kiva wasn't doing that. She was keeping us in the loop. She also talked about what was going on with it openly on Twitter too. So we got an email every month, but then we could also see everything she had to say. Well, this guy realized that I was the one who did the logo and that I was part of the card deck. So, oh my God, conspiracy. Someone that Kiva Bay is paying to fight this battle for her. And wrote some stupid thing on his website talking about how people like me were like seeds in the community growing up to fight people and keep them from exposing the truth about Kiva. I don't know. But it was the silliest thing ever. I'm like, I'm not on anyone's payroll. I'm telling you this because I'm a backer, so I get the emails. That's it. That's the only reason why I said anything to you at all. Because you're purposely saying things that are untrue, and I know it because I get the emails. That's it. But man, the fit he threw about that.
It sounds like you were really in a no-win situation. I mean, if she's paying you, then you're on her payroll. And if you refuse the money, then you're obviously indebted to her and biased because you're volunteering and donating your time.
Mm-hmm. That's the way he saw it. He was like, either you're taking money or you or whatever. He saw it that exact same way. And that's what he said in his little expose about Chachi Bobinks. Yeah. It was so silly. I'm like, no, I think Kiva's a great person, and you're saying shit that isn't true, and I'm going to tell you that you are, and that's all. That's all that was.
I'm sorry you had to put up with that.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, I too backed her Kickstarter, and I gave her more money to draw my Twitter avatar because I am not in the feminist deck. I guess my feminist score isn't high enough. I got to work on that. I have to level up.
One of these days, Ken.
I know. Got to level up my feminism. Honestly. So I'm super excited to meet you at PAX East. We got to make that happen.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, there are so many enforcers, and we'll figure out how to identify each other. I'll be the guy up on stage at the ethics and games journalism panel. People throwing tomatoes at. I'm like, no. The panel is supposed to just be about what is it actually like to be a games journalist? So many people want to review video games for a living, and so few people get to actually do it. So I'm going to be speaking with people like Holly Green and Susan Arndt, who have been on this show, and Alexa Ray Correa from GameSpot, and just ask them, what is it like to actually work in this industry? What are some of your hardest assignments? How do you get your freelancers paid, et cetera, et cetera?
Exactly.
Because there have been so many panels I've attended at PAX about how to get into the industry, because so many people want to. I'm like, okay, now you're in the industry.
How do you
now
make
what?
money?
Is it everything it's cracked up to be? Probably not.
Yeah.
So, cool. Tell us where we can find you and your podcast online.
Oh, right. Yeah. So on Twitter, if you're a Twitterer, you can go to @DialogueWheel to see my podcast itself, or you can find me at Chachi Bobinks. So you can find our podcast at thedialoguewheel.podbean.com.
Awesome. So thanks so much, Chachi, for coming on the show and discussing so many diverse and great topics. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Anytime. Thank you. It was fun. I don't get to talk about this kind of stuff very often.
Seriously? You have your own podcast?
I know, right? Have you listened to the show, though? How often do I get to talk before some very annoying Tyler has to talk over me? Come on now. Come on.
Why are you not talking over him?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe
you got to grab those reins, Chachi.
I do. I will. Next show.
Let your enforcer out.
You get in line.
That's right.
This conversation is capped. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I will see you next month at PAX.
All right. See you then. Thank you.
This has been Polygamer, a Gamebits production. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback at polygamer.net.